Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library, and today we're going to be talking about a little application called Photopea. So what is Photopea? It is a free photo editor that runs in a web browser. You can pay for a premium account if you like for a couple of additional features like AI tools and the ability to host Photopea on your own website. While it runs in a browser, it is not cloud-based, meaning it runs on your local computer. Basically, you go to their website, click a button, and it runs right up, and you don't have to worry about lag or creating an account. Though you can create an account with Photopea if you like, and that'll get you a ½ gigabyte of free cloud storage. The application looks and feels much like Adobe Photoshop, incorporating most of its primary basic features, and it'll export most major image file types, including Adobe files like the PSDs and AIs. If that doesn't sound good enough, you can even do a little bit with vector graphics, though if you were focused solely on vector graphics, I'd recommend you still stick to Inkscape. It all sounds like a pretty good deal, and I think it is, but there are a few drawbacks, and one of the big ones is when you're using the free version, you're going to be seeing advertisements to the far right. Even if you're running an ad blocker, the part of the screen that would have had the advertisements still remains blank, so you're going to be missing a piece of your screen's real estate there. While you do have a lot of Photoshop's functionality, you are going to be missing some tools, and the pros will probably pick up on that right away. Larger projects and some of the more computationally advanced tools will suffer from a little bit of slowdown as well. I thought it might have been just the computers I was using, but other people have said the same thing. Another drawback is working with panels. If you've used other drawing programs before, you probably have seen panels that you can move around and use to customize your interface. With Photopea, the panels are pretty much stuck to the right side of the screen, though you can shrink and expand the columns. One last drawback is for the people that use third-party support for plugins. With Photopea, there really isn't a whole lot of that, at least as of right now. All right, let's go ahead and start using Photopea. To do that, first thing you gotta do is open up a browser. I'm gonna be using Firefox in private mode. In the URL field, go ahead and type in photopea.com, spelled just like that. And when you hit enter, it'll take you to their homepage. Feel free to read up if you like. Otherwise, when you're all set, go ahead and click on any one of the Start Using Photopea buttons, and we're up and rolling. To start a new project, you just click on New Project here. If you want to edit a project that's already made on your computer, go ahead and click on Open from Computer. Or if you wanted to just start with some pre-made content, click on Templates. You can also drag and drop your image files into this rectangle here that says Drop Any Files Here, and that'll open them straight away. We have a list of folders here on the left side. If you wanted to give Photopea direct access to these folders, you can go ahead and do that. Then those will work for you. You can also click on the File menu option, and you have a New and an Open menu option, which will do the same things. I'm going to go ahead and click on New Project. That takes us to this screen here. There's a whole bunch of preset dimensions and a description of what they're used for. So if you're going to do an Instagram image, you might want the 1080 by 1080 that they have set here, YouTube profile 800 by 800, etc. There's a menu at the top here with a bunch of different kinds of dimensions to choose from. The last one is 2n. These are all dimensions in powers of 2. That is because computers like rendering in powers of 2 a little bit better than anything else, and it'll render faster. So if you're making tiles for video games, this is what you'd want to do. At the bottom, if you change your mind and you want to start with a template, just go ahead and click on that, and you can see what's available. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and go back to image size, and I'll go with the Instagram 1080 by 1080. On the right side here, you can go ahead and name your file. You can also set custom dimensions if you like. Set custom DPI, that's dots per inch, in case you were printing. You can also set a different color background, so you can go with white, black, anything you like, or transparent. I'm just going to leave it at white for now. and click Create. So this is our typical workspace here. You'll notice I do not have ads on the right side because of my browser settings. If you did, it would look something like this. So you'd have a bunch of ads on the right side here, and those will change every 10 to 20 seconds or so. It can get kind of distracting, especially since some of them are actually movies or have scrolling involved. It's up to you if you want to leave those on, support the developer, but otherwise, I'm going to just leave it blank here because otherwise it would make for a rather distractive tutorial. So having a look at what is all here, at the top we still have our typical browser tabs and URL bar. If you try to leave the page, you will get a warning. So that's nice, so you won't just lose all of your work by going back and forth. Below that we've got our standard menu. I don't think it's anything you haven't seen before. Below that are the tool options, and these will change depending on which tool is selected. We'll go over some of those later as we go through the toolbar. The toolbar, of course, is over on the far left side here. The middle is our workspace. You'll notice at the top we have a tab here. If you open up multiple files, they'll all be tabbed along the top, and you can go ahead and choose a tab to switch to that file. And then on the far right here, we have our panels. So up at the top here, we have these little less than and greater than symbols to expand and minimize the panels. If you wanted to click on the window menu option here, you can see which panels are already up because they'll have check marks next to them. And anything that isn't checked, you can go ahead and click on, and it will pull it up over in the panels here. With that, let's go ahead and start looking at the tools. Alright, so I don't want this to be a terribly long video, so I'm just going to bounce around through some of the tools so you can get a feel for how Photopea works, and then I'll finish with a brief discussion on layers. So to start off with, let's go ahead and look at the brush tool. It's about a third of the way down. If you roll over it, it says brush tool with the B in parentheses, which means you can use the B key as a shortcut. If you click and hold for just a little bit, you'll see associated tools also pop up, so this would be how you get to the pencil tool and the color replacement tool as well. However, we're just going to worry about the brush tool for now. Click on the brush tool, and then to use it, you just hold down the left mouse button and drag, and there you go. If you want to change the color, what you do is come all the way down at the bottom here where you see these two little squares. These are the foreground and background colors. You click on the foreground color, choose another color by clicking somewhere in the square, hit OK, and we have another color. I'm going to click on this foreground color again. If you wanted to choose a color other than red, you can click and drag within this little rainbow on the right side here. Go with green. Click anywhere in the square. OK. There we go. I'm going to set this back to black for now. And now we'll have a look at the top here. And this is where we have our tool options. We've got the first guy here, which I believe is saved brushes. I don't have anything there right now. If I click on the little numbered circle next to that, this is some options for our brush stroke. If we click and drag on the circles here, we can make it a little more narrow. Click and drag on the arrow, you can make it angled. We have a size slider as well. And hardness will affect how hard or soft the edges of the stroke are. So we'll go ahead and put this down a bit. And now when I draw, see we have soft edges, we have an angle, we have a narrow brush. So it's a lot different. Have a look at some of the other options here. We have blend mode. I'm going to set this back to green. Set OK. And let's have a look at, one of these is kind of interesting here, linear dodge. So if we do that, you see we have all sorts of interesting effects there. You can float through the rest of those on your own. We also have opacity. If you lower that, you will get a lighter stroke, which will let the other strokes show through. Actually, I can't even see that. Oh, and we're on linear dodge, so let's set this back to normal. There we go. So again, it's a lighter stroke that lets things show through. And you'll notice even if I go back over what I already did, it doesn't get any darker. I'll put the opacity back up and affect the flow. The flow is as if you were using an airbrush. So if I set this down to something much lower, you see it's kind of like opacity, except I can go back over my strokes and it will actually darken. A couple other options here. These two guys are for if you're using a tablet. You can actually use pressure to change what things look like. And this last option here is for mirroring. So if I were to click on that guy, add a vertical mirror, and then go back to the brush tool, you can see that my strokes are being mirrored. Pretty cool. I'm going to deselect that for now. And we've got a pretty good mess here, so if we want to clean that up, what we could do is either go to Edit and undo one step in the history at a time. You could also go to the history panel here that's open by default and go up and down through your history. Keep in mind the history only saves about 20 steps. I think you get more if you sign up for a premium account, but something definitely to be aware of. You can also use the Control-Z, which is standard in many other applications, to undo one step at a time. One other thing I want to look at here is the brushes panel, which is this little icon with a brush here. If you click on that, it will open it up, and you can see there's a whole bunch more options here. If we choose tip dynamics, that'll change the tip of the brush behavior. That doesn't really look to do too much, but if we were to do jitter, you can definitely see something happening to our stroke there. Go to scatter, that really does some damage. But if you play around with it, you can get some very interesting strokes. Now undo all that. You can also, again, remember, maximize and minimize the size of the columns if that's more convenient for you. So that is the brush tool, and we floated through a whole bunch of the options for goofing around with it. The next tool we're going to talk about is the rectangle tool, which is not quite as intuitive as you'd think. It's located near the bottom of the toolbar. If you roll over it, it says rectangle, and apparently the shortcut key is U. Click and hold the mouse button down for just a sec. You'll see the associated shape tools. We're going to stick with the rectangle for now. And to draw your rectangle, just click and drag and release. And there you go. See a bunch of squares and circles all over the place. If you hold your mouse over one of the squares on the sides, you'll notice there's a double arrow. Just click and drag with the double arrow in order to change a dimension. If you click and drag on the corners, you can adjust both dimensions at the same time. If you hold the mouse just outside of the squares, you'll notice that the double arrow turns into a rotating double arrow, and then you can click and drag in order to rotate about the center of the shape. I'm going to undo that for now. You can also click and drag on the circles in order to adjust the corner radii. So that's how you'd round out the corners of your rectangle. All right, let's go ahead and have a look at some of the tool options here. You notice there's a drop down where it says shape. We'll look at that in a sec. The fill will adjust the color of the rectangle. You can either choose one of the default colors, or if you click on this guy, you can actually choose a custom color. I'm going to stick with the default colors for now. The stroke is X'd out by default, meaning there is no stroke. But if you click on the little color square here, again, you can choose a custom color if you like, but I'm going to go with a default. We'll say red. And you can't really see it now because it's only set to 1 pixel, but if you click on this down arrow next to the 1 pixel, drag the slider around, you can see what the stroke looks like. So next to that, there's a couple of stroke options we're not going to look at right now. After that, it says Unite. What that means is if you start drawing rectangles on top of each other, they will combine into the same shape. There's a few other options here. If you were to say to subtract and draw a rectangle, that will take a bite out of your shape. Again, I'm going to clear things out a bit. Next to this here, it says free. That means we've been free drawing our rectangles, but there's some other options if you wanted to restrict what you're drawing. Say you wanted to draw squares. What you would do is choose fixed ratio and then choose 1:1. You see there's some other options here, and you can also choose your own custom options. But now when you click and drag, you see you can only draw squares. Undo those guys. Besides fixed ratio, you can also do fixed size. So this will determine the size of your rectangle before you create it. So you can go ahead and enter what you want up here. We'll just stick with 1000 by 200. And if I try to click and drag a rectangle, you see I can only draw a rectangle with those dimensions. And if I click and drag around, oops, again, I can only get the 1000 by 200 rectangle. So you'll notice as I've been drawing rectangles, it's all been in this new layer called Shape 1. And you might see that there's a little icon here. It's a square with circles on the corners, indicating that this is a vector graphics layer. In a vector graphics layer, you can only use vector graphics tools, which means if you try to use raster graphics tools, which are what most people are accustomed to using, say the brush tool, I get an error saying that I can't do any editing with that tool. So instead, if you wanted to goof around with your rectangles, you can either use the pen tool or any of its associated tools, or the tool below it, which has a direct select and a path select option. So I don't want to get too much into vector graphics today, but if I were to choose direct select and draw a selection rectangle here, you see I can goof around with the handles and the nodes in order to edit the rectangle. So if you did want to treat these rectangles as regular raster graphics, so you can goof around with the eraser tools and paintbrush tools and things like that, what you can do is go to Layer and then Rasterize, and you see all of those nodes and handles went away. And if I were to choose the paintbrush now, I can actually start scribbling around on this layer. You'll notice over in the layer panel that that little vector graphics icon went away. Another thing you could do, I'm going to go back up here. Again, we're back to the vector graphics layer. If we go to Layer and then Merge Down, it merges that vector graphics layer with the background layer, and it rasterizes it at the same time. So you've got several options there for rasterizing your rectangles. Now, if you wanted to start off with raster rectangles in the first place, what you can do is choose the rectangle tool here, and where it says shape, instead choose pixels. And now when I draw my rectangle, ooh, we're still in the fixed size rectangle, you see it just draws you a raster rectangle straight up. It doesn't create any new layers, but at the same time you don't have all those other options with the rounding corners and adjusting the dimensions with those squares. So again, I'm going to go to the free option here. So you have fewer editing options, but at the same time you're still dealing with raster graphics. So if that's what you prefer, that's how you go about it. Dealing with ellipses works pretty much the same way. Just choose the ellipse tool, draw it, and there you go. If you were to work with the shapes, again, you draw it, and just like with the rectangles, it puts it on its own layer. And the only difference really is you don't have the options for rounding the corners. So that's all I want to talk about with that tool. All right, for the next bunch of tools, let's go ahead and use a photograph. I'm going to go to File, Open. Then on the desktop we have the BPL exterior. Go ahead and open that. And if you've never been to our library before, this is what it looks like. So with this photograph, what we're going to do is have a look at the hand tool. It is near the bottom of the toolbar. It is H for the shortcut. And with the hand tool, all you do is click and drag to move the canvas around. That's all the hand tool is for. So you might get things messed up, maybe while you're zoomed in or something. The hand tool is what you'd use to set things back. If you click the box for all documents, move things around a bit, you'll see it affects all of the open images at once. So that's the hand tool. That is grouped with the rotate view tool, which is R for the shortcut. And you still have a hand with the rotate tool selected, but if you click and drag, you see the results are quite different. If you want to set things back, you just click the reset button in the top left corner. Or if you wanted to set a manual angle, you can go ahead and type it in up here in this field. So if you wanted everything upside down, you just type in 180. Or if you wanted it outside, type in 90. And there you go. And that's the rotate view tool. Below that is the zoom tool. Shortcut is Z. So with the zoom tool selected, you see we have a little magnifying glass with a plus sign in it. Just click to zoom in. The zoom will be affected by where your tool is. If you want to zoom out, you go up to the tool options, click the minus sign, and when you click, you'll start to zoom out. And again, how you're zooming out is affected by where you're clicking. Just a bit. So that's zooming out. If you wanted 1 pixel in your image to equal 1 pixel on your display, you go pixel to pixel. And when I do that, let's go ahead and get our hand tool out. You see our image is actually pretty big. So that's pixel to pixel. Going back to the zoom tool here. If you want to fit everything into the workspace without overflowing, just click Fit the Area. And there you go. And you have an All Documents option for the zoom tool as well. So that is the hand tool, rotate tool, and the zoom tool. Alright, the next tool we're going to cover is the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool is located kind of near the top of the toolbar. If you roll over it, it says eyedropper. The shortcut is I. The whole point of the eyedropper tool is to set the foreground color to the color of the pixel that I click on. So if I click somewhere in the sky, it turns the foreground color light blue. I click on the pavement, it turns it into a dark blue. I think you get the point. You typically use the eyedropper tool in conjunction with other drawing tools to set its color. So you'd use the eyedropper tool to set the foreground color and then choose the brush tool or the paint bucket tool or the rectangle tool or something like that. Let's see if we can use the eyedropper tool with the brush tool in order to maybe lessen the appearance of some of these cracks in our parking lot. So you can see there's a lot of shadow going on. Let's just focus on the ones in the light here. So we're going to zoom in. Oops. There we go. We're going to choose the eyedropper tool, select a color near the cracks, choose the paintbrush tool, make sure it's kind of large, and we're going to make it kind of soft so it blends in a little bit better. And we'll just go from there. That looks alright. Alright, let's just leave it at that. We'll go ahead and zoom out. I'll just fit the area. And that looks pretty good. So because of all the shadowing there, you'd have to do a lot of work to get the local colors and paint over the cracks, but I think you see how that works. So that is the eyedropper tool in conjunction with the brush tool. I also want to have a quick look at the paint bucket tool, which is actually hidden under the gradient tool. So hold the mouse button down for a little bit, select the paint bucket tool, and the paint bucket tool, it's sometimes called the fill tool in other drawing programs. What it does is it fills any contiguous color with the color in the foreground spot. So there's a whole bunch of tool options here. I'm only going to focus on the tolerance for right now. So the less tolerant you have the tool set for, the less area it's going to cover. The more tolerant, the more it will spill over into other colors. So let's go ahead, and tolerance of 10 is actually pretty low, but let's go ahead and make it look like our library is in the sky. So we're going to use the eyedropper, choose a sky color, choose a paint bucket, and we'll start near the bottom here. So you see it tries to spill over into all of the contiguous colors, and our parking lot has a lot of spottiness to it, so it's not doing a very good job with that. If we wanted to try to cover more area, we can increase the tolerance a bit. We'll increase it to 20. You see it covers a bit more space. Increase it to 40. And I think you get the point. So the more tolerant you set the paint bucket to, the more colors it will spill into. So if I were to set it to like 100, click somewhere in the parking lot here, you see it just spills all over everything. So that is the paint bucket tool. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. All right, next we're going to talk about the selection and move tools. So we'll start off with the rectangular select. It's kind of near the top of the toolbar here. If you roll over it, it says rectangle select, and the shortcut is M. To make a rectangular selection, just click and drag and release just like you would a rectangle. And there you go. We have a rectangular selection area in our workspace. And there's a couple of things we can do with that. The first thing we can do is use it to restrict our editing. So if I were to choose the brush tool and start drawing, you see that my editing is restricted to the rectangular selection area. This can be useful if you're doing some editing and you want to work on one area while leaving the other area clean. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is use the rectangular select to move something. So once you have an area selected, this is where we'd use the move tool to move that selection. So that is the very top tool. You see it says move tool at the top and the shortcut is V. I'm going to go ahead and select that. And now I can move that rectangular area selected. You'll see because I'm working with the background layer, I'm leaving transparency in its wake. So that's probably not something you want to do without covering that up first. Now undo that. Incidentally, if you wanted to move your selection without taking the content with it, you just keep using the rectangular selection tool and you can click and drag the selection area without moving the content. One more thing you could do with your rectangular selection area is use it to cut, copy, and paste. So let's go ahead and go to Edit and Copy. So we have a copy of our flag, and then we'll go ahead and paste it. You'll notice all the cut, copy, and paste shortcuts are exactly what you'd expect. Control X, Control C, and Control V. So I'll go ahead and paste it. And when I did, you don't really see anything different, but if you look in the Layers panel, we actually put that pasted flag onto its own layer. And if I were to hit Control V a couple more times to paste a couple more, you'll see each new flag gets its own layer. And so if we go to the Move tool here, we can click and drag, and we'd have to go to each individual layer to move each individual flag. Just a note, you'll notice that I'm moving these flags without selecting them. If you don't have anything selected while you're using the move tool will move the entire layer. So if I go to the background layer with the move tool selected and start moving things, you see it moves the whole layer around. So that's why I'm moving the flags around without selecting them. I'm actually moving the entire layer that they're on. Let's go ahead and go back to square one. So those are some basic uses for the rectangle select tool. Underneath the rectangle select is the ellipse select, and it works pretty much the same way. You'll notice the tool options at the top here are pretty similar to what we had before. We have unite, subtract, and intersect, which we also had when we were working with the rectangles, if you remember. So if we typically we have replace, which means anytime you create a new selection, it replaces the old one. But if you select unite, you actually add one to what was already selected. In case you're having trouble seeing this, I'll go ahead and paint it in. You can see I have multiple selections all united together. At the same time, you can go ahead and choose subtract and create a selection area, and that will deselect the area. So I'll go ahead and choose a different color. And now when I start drawing, you'll see it does not include what was subtracted. Otherwise, the options are pretty similar. You can feather and anti-alias the edges of the selection. You also have the options to create fixed ratios and fixed sizes, just like you did before with the rectangles. So that is the basic selection tools. I'm going to go ahead and go back to square one. We also have some other selection tools here. The lasso select basically works just like the rectangle and ellipse, except you can free draw your selection. Again, just so you can see what I'm talking about, I'll color it in. I know it's hard to see sometimes. Otherwise, all the same options exist for combining and such. Otherwise, we have the polygonal lasso select, which is the same thing, except you're creating lines with each click versus freehand drawing. So this could be good if you had some straight edges that you wanted to maintain that you couldn't freehand and that were at an angle that didn't work with the rectangle select. So you go ahead and use this polygonal select, and that way, like for the building here, you could trace the building and get everything just right. When you're using these other selection tools, you can't just click outside of the selection area to make the selection go away. Instead, you have to go to select, deselect, and that will clear all your selection markings away. One last guy here is the magnetic lasso select, and what that tries to do is follow lines of contrast to make your selection. So if we zoomed in a little bit, we wanted to say follow the line of the parking lot here. We go ahead and choose the magnetic select, and it might be kind of hard to see, but it's trying to follow the line of the curb. See if I can get it so we can see what's going on here. You go all the way back to where you started, and I'll go ahead and color that in. And you can see the magnetic select was able to follow the lines pretty well. Okay, so I was planning on covering a couple more tools. However, this video is starting to run a bit long, so we're going to jump to layers, look at saving, and then hopefully I will have made my case that Photopea is worth giving a look. So I've got a project open here. Let's see what we can do with the layers. One thing you can do is rename a layer. To do that, you just double click on the name of the layer, type in a new name, hit enter, and that's all there is to it. Another thing you can do is change the order of the layers. So let's say we want to bring the background up to the top. All you do is select it and then drag it, and you can see where the layer is going to go by the white line. If I bring it all the way to the top, we get this. All the other layers have transparency for their background. However, the background layer has a white background, so it's covering everything up. So let's go ahead and put it back to the bottom. There we go. Another thing you might want to do is edit a layer that is being covered up by the layers above it. So let's say we wanted to add something to the orange layer. So what we would do is turn off the visibility of all the layers above it. Make sure that layer 1 is selected. And just so we know what layer we're working with, we're going to go ahead and use the eyedropper to make it orange. And we'll make some scribbles here. All right, amazing. Once we're all done, we can go ahead and set the visibility back to the layers above it. And there we go. Next, we can go ahead and create a new layer. It's going to go one layer above the currently selected layer. So to do that, you click on the little paper with the corner turned up. If you roll over it, it says new layer. Click on that. And let's go ahead and bring this all the way to the top here. And we'll put a purple rectangle on that and sticking with the theme. And there we go. That's our new layer. Above the layers, you'll notice there's a bunch of options here. One of them is kind of an effect. So if we go to linear dodge, you'll see the rectangle reacts with the layers below it kind of differently. You can look at the rest of those options on your own. I'm going to set this back to normal. We can also adjust the opacity. So as I slide that down, you see it kind of fades away. And the fill is kind of similar but different. You also have lock options. So you can lock various aspects of a layer, like its transparency, its pixels, and its movement. Or you can just click on the lock, which will lock all of that. So now if I choose the move tool, I cannot move the purple rectangle. However, if I click and drag on the blue one, it's not a big deal. If I try to draw on the purple layer, you see I get an error message. One last thing we might want to do is delete a layer. Let's go ahead and delete this ugly orange layer that I scribbled all over. You just select the layer, click on the garbage can, it says delete when you roll over it, and just like that, it's gone. So there's a bunch more things we can do with layers, but I think that's a pretty good start. And so for now, let's go ahead and look at saving. So to do that, you just go to File, and if you had more editing to do or you wanted to preserve the ability to goof around with layers and such, you can go ahead and save as a PSD, which is the same file type as Photoshop uses. When I click on that, you see it basically goes to the download folder. So we're working locally, but working on the browser and saving it puts it in the download folder anyway. If you wanted to create an actual image instead of a project file, you can go to Export As, and you have a whole bunch of common image types to choose from. JPEG is usually a pretty good bet. So I'm going to choose JPEG. Look at the options here, click Save. Again, it's going to the download folder. And if I open up the download folder, you see there it is. We've got the project file and the JPEG file right there. We'll go ahead and open it up. And there it is. So with that, I think we're good. I hope you had fun, I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a good day.